32 years of service, 3 wars, the loss of his wife, and now he sings the national anthem for coins at the train station. When the veteran tried to steal food because he was hungry, he was arrested. In court, he showed his worn tokens, and the room fell silent. No one expected who he would turn out to be. The reporter dug up the archives, and the judge's expression changed. What sentence did the judge hand down? The last time Staff Sergeant Raymond Booker wore his uniform with pride, it was pressed so crisp you could slice paper with the creases. He stood on a podium in Fort Bragg, the sun cutting across the brass on his chest, the echoes of his final cadence fading behind him like a closing chapter. 32 years of service. Bosnia. Iraq. Afghanistan. Every stripe on his sleeve earned with bone and blood. That day, Lorraine had worn a navy blue dress and held back tears with a trembling smile. She hated ceremonies. But she knew Ray needed her there, and that was enough. When they got home, she kissed his forehead and whispered, "Now we figure out life all over again." He didn't know then how brief life all over again would be. Lorraine was a schoolteacher, patient, thoughtful, and unshakably kind. She had always been Ray's calm in the storm, the one voice that tethered him when the world became noise. But within a year of his retirement, she was gone. Ovarian cancer. The symptoms had been misread by the VA clinic, likely early menopause, they'd said. By the time a second opinion arrived, it was too late. Ray held her hand in hospice as the snow piled against the window and whispered old stories from their early years, the pancakes she burned on their first morning as husband and wife, the letter he kept in his breast pocket through 3 deployments, her laugh echoing through the kitchen on lazy Sundays. When she stopped breathing, he folded the sheet over her face himself. He didn't cry. Not then. The funeral was sparse, some of her students, a few neighbors, and one lonely bugler from the local American Legion. The flag that draped her casket felt like a betrayal. Red, white, and blue, colors that failed to save her. In the months that followed, Ray became a ghost inside their small apartment. Her books still lined the shelves. Her favorite coffee mug sat untouched. He stopped checking the mailbox. What was there to read? Then came the letter. A form response from the Department of Veterans Affairs. An error in his pension processing. His benefits paused pending investigation. No timeline. No apology. Just, "We regret the inconvenience." He called. Waited on hold. Left voicemails. No one called back. Ray sold Lorraine's car first. Then his own medals. One by one, the Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, even his unit's challenge coin from Helmand Province, each pawned for less than their ribbon cost. Some nights he would wake up gasping, convinced he was back in the desert. Other nights, he'd sit for hours on their old balcony, staring at a blank sky, whispering Lorraine's name like a prayer. He tried taking jobs, light security, groundskeeping, but the gaps in his resume and the shake in his hand scared off employers. Too old, too slow. "Thank you for your service," they'd say. And close the door. The landlord was kind at first. "Take your time, Ray," he said. But kindness has limits. 3 months behind on rent, Ray found an eviction notice taped to the door. Red letters, bold and final. He packed slowly. A rucksack and a duffel. Some photos. His dog tags. Lorraine's Bible. As he walked down the stairs of the building he once called home, an elderly neighbor peeked from behind her curtains and quickly pulled away. He didn't blame her. No one wants to watch someone fall. Outside, the wind had a bite to it. February in Richmond could turn skin raw. Ray zipped his jacket, the same one he'd worn in Kabul, minus the patches, and looked down the long street ahead. He had nowhere to be. But he kept walking anyway. The first night on the street, Ray chose the alley behind St. Elmo's Bakery because it smelled like cinnamon rolls. The warmth from the oven seeped through the brick wall until midnight. He huddled beneath a piece of cardboard, Lorraine's Bible under his arm, and counted the hours by how often the city bus hissed to a stop. It wasn't so bad, he told himself. He'd slept in worse places. Foxholes in Tikrit. Collapsed garages in Kandahar. Concrete never cared who you were. By the third week, Ray had a routine. Rise before dawn. Fold his makeshift bedding neatly, an old blanket gifted by a passing church group, a flattened Amazon box. Tuck his dog tags inside his shirt. Walk to the public restroom at the park to wash his face, brush his teeth with a finger and a dab of baking soda, and comb his beard into some kind of order. Always keep clean. Lorraine would have insisted. Most days he stood outside the train station. That's where the anthem began. He didn't sing it with gusto or pride. He sang it softly, like a man remembering something fragile. Oh, say can you see, drifting just loud enough to be heard over traffic. The old-timers sometimes paused to nod. Tourists passed without a glance. But every so often, someone dropped coins into the coffee can at his feet. A few dollars. Enough for a sandwich and some soup. That can became his income. His stage. His confession booth. He never asked for help. Not once. If people gave, they gave. If they didn't, he'd collect cans and bottles from trash bins, rinse them in the public fountain, bag them up, trade them for 5 cents apiece. It wasn't begging if you worked for it. One afternoon, a boy, maybe 6 or 7, stopped in front of him, tugging at his mother's coat. "Why is that man singing?" the boy asked. His mother didn't answer. She simply pulled him away. Ray watched them go with a small nod. He wasn't offended. He understood. In America, soldiers come home in movies, not in alleyways. Once, in a rare flush of luck, a woman from the diner offered him leftover chili. He thanked her, took it to his bench, and spooned it slow. It tasted like memory. He tried to smile. He hadn't had warm food in days. At night, he migrated between doorways and benches. He avoided shelters. Too loud. Too dangerous. He'd seen a man stabbed over socks. Better the streets. At least there, you knew the rules. One evening, while sitting beneath the overpass off Canal Street, he reached into his coat and pulled out an old photo, him and Lorraine, summer 1992, standing in front of Mount Rushmore. She wore a straw hat too big for her head and laughed as if nothing in the world could touch them. The picture was creased, fading at the edges. Still, he looked at it every night. "I'm still here, low," he whispered. "Just a little lost. That's all." But as the weeks turned into months, Ray noticed something strange. People stopped seeing him. Not just ignoring, truly not seeing. He could sit on a bench for hours and no one would make eye contact. He could walk into a store and be shadow. The only time anyone really noticed was when he got too close, and then came the flinches. The turned backs. The mumbled apologies and sideways steps. It was a new kind of war. Not one of bullets or commands. A quiet war, fought in glances and silence. He thought of calling his niece, Emily. She used to send Christmas cards. But pride clenched his throat. What would he say? That he sang for coins? That his address was a park bench? No. She didn't need that burden. She had her own life. Still, in his mind, he sometimes wrote her letters. "Dear Em, I'm okay. Found a spot that doesn't flood when it rains. A cop gave me gloves last week. Not bad for winter. I remember your laugh. Just wanted to say that." He never sent them. He had no stamps. No return address. One day, passing a window, Ray saw his reflection. The beard had gone wild. His coat, once olive green, was now threadbare and stained. The boots, his last pair from Fort Bragg, had holes at the toes. He looked like a ghost of a man who once stood tall. It was the kind of cold that sliced through fabric and found your bones. February's breath turned Ray's hands to stone, his fingers stiff as twigs. The gloves the officer had given him weeks ago were gone, snatched off a bench while he slept. He didn't blame whoever took them. Everyone was fighting their own war out here. He hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. A man could live without pride. Without warmth. Without shelter. But not without food. The bodega on 5th and Clover was small, lit with the kind of flickering fluorescence that made everything feel 10 years older. Ray had passed it every day, watched other men haggle for loose cigarettes or scratch-off tickets. He never stepped inside. Not until that day. He entered like a shadow, eyes scanning the aisles. The warmth hit him like a memory. Behind the counter, a young man with thick glasses scrolled through his phone, earbuds in. Ray didn't want to take much. Just enough. A bottle of water. A granola bar. A small can of Vienna sausages. He tucked them into the inside of his coat as quietly as he could. He was 3 steps from the door when a voice barked behind him. "Hey! Stop!" The manager, short, balding, furious, appeared from the back room. The clerk yanked his earbuds out. "I saw that. Empty your pockets." Ray froze. The heat in the store vanished. His heartbeat drummed in his ears like incoming fire. He could have run, but where? He wasn't a thief. Not really. Not in his heart. But hunger didn't care about morals. "I'll put it back," Ray said quietly, reaching into his coat. Too late for that, the manager snapped, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the cops." Ray held up his hands, slow and tired. "I wasn't stealing. I was surviving." The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers, one older, one young. The manager explained, waving his arms as if Ray had robbed a bank. Ray said nothing. The older officer stepped forward. "Sir, do you have any ID?" Ray reached into his rucksack and pulled out his last possession of meaning, a battered leather wallet with his expired military ID and a folded photo of Lorraine. The officer opened the wallet and paused. His eyes flicked to Ray's face. Then down to the dog tags hanging from his neck. The older man's expression shifted slightly, like a wave retreating from shore. "You served?" he asked. Ray nodded. 32 years. The younger cop was already pulling out zip ties. "We've got to take him in, right?" The older one hesitated. For a second, it seemed like he might wave it off. But duty is a stubborn thing. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "But we've got to process the complaint." They didn't cuff him with metal. Just the zip ties, loose. The back of the squad car smelled like stale fries and disinfectant. Ray stared out the window as the world passed in reverse. It wasn't shame he felt. It was exhaustion. At the station, they logged him in like any other petty theft case. Name. Age. Fingerprints. The booking officer didn't even look at him. He was given a holding cell with one flickering light and a bench that smelled like despair. Across from him, a teenager with a busted lip stared blankly at the wall. Ray sat in silence. He could still taste the cold metal of the can he'd tried to take. Somewhere, in the building's distance, he heard the faint notes of a national anthem. Maybe from a radio. Maybe just his own tired mind. He closed his eyes. "I wasn't stealing," he whispered again. "I was surviving." The courtroom smelled like old wood, tired paper, and yesterday's coffee. Ray sat at the defendant's table in a borrowed blazer 2 sizes too big. His hands trembled slightly, whether from cold, hunger, or humiliation, he couldn't tell anymore. To his right, the public defender flipped through a thin file with the apathy of someone checking receipts. She hadn't asked much when they met. Didn't need to. Petty theft, no priors, no violence. Just another sad, disposable case in an endless line of them. "You served?" she'd asked, glancing at his ID. "Yeah," Ray replied. 32 years. She gave a polite nod and returned to the file. "Might help a little with the judge." "We'll see." Ray said nothing. The courtroom was mostly empty. A few tired clerks. A bored bailiff. One reporter in the back, mid-30s, rumpled suit, legal pad in hand. Ray didn't notice him. His eyes were fixed on the judge's bench, where a worn American flag hung like a forgotten promise. The judge entered, a tall, stern woman in her late 50s. Her robe swayed as she moved. She adjusted her glasses and called the case without ceremony. The People versus Raymond Booker. Charged with misdemeanor theft. The prosecutor, young and overconfident, launched into a flat summary. "Your Honor, the defendant was caught on store camera concealing food items, value under $15. The store manager is present. The state requests community service and a formal warning on record. Ray's attorney stood but barely looked up. We request leniency, Your Honor. Mr. Booker is a veteran, retired staff sergeant. No criminal history. He was homeless at the time. There was no intent to resell, just hunger. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Booker, do you have anything to say for yourself? Ray stood slowly, steadying himself with one hand on the table. The courtroom felt colder than the street outside. I didn't take it because I wanted to, he said quietly. I took it because I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I sang the anthem outside the train station that morning. Got $1.17. Wasn't enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his dog tags, laying them gently on the table like an offering. I've never stolen anything in my life. But I've buried friends. Led men through firefights. Lost the only person who ever made coming home make sense. I wasn't stealing. I was surviving. The judge didn't move. But the silence in the room changed. It wasn't indifference anymore. It was listening. In the back row, the journalist leaned forward slightly, squinting at the name, Raymond Booker. He flipped through his notebook. Something sparked. Fallujah. 2004, a human interest piece he'd written during an embed with the 82nd Airborne. A staff sergeant had pulled 2 Marines from a burning Humvee under sniper fire. He'd quoted him directly. I didn't think. I just moved. You save who you can and carry the rest. The reporter's pen trembled. It was him. He rose, walking down the aisle toward the front. Your Honor, he called softly, unsure of the protocol. May I speak? The judge raised an eyebrow. State your name. Daniel Price. Freelance journalist. I embedded with the 82nd Airborne in Iraq. That man, he pointed to Ray, saved 2 lives in Fallujah. I wrote about it. He didn't want credit then. Said he was just doing his job. The courtroom stilled. Ray looked over, puzzled. Price reached into his bag and pulled out a laminated copy of the article. Yellowed edges, faded ink, but the photo was clear, Ray, younger, soot-streaked, pulling a Marine to safety. The judge studied it for a long moment. Then she looked back at Ray. Why didn't you mention this, she asked. Ray shrugged. Didn't think it mattered. She tapped her pen against the bench. Staff Sergeant Booker, she said slowly, you are not invisible here. The prosecutor, pale now, sat down without a word. The public defender looked stunned, for the first time really seeing the men beside her. The judge continued. I am halting these proceedings pending further review of Mr. Booker's military records and benefit status. In the meantime, I recommend temporary release and housing arranged through Veterans Outreach. Mr. Price, I suggest you contact them as well. Ray didn't fully hear the words. His ears rang. His eyes fixed on the photo, on the younger version of himself, alive in a firestorm, doing what he was trained to do. For the first time in years, he felt like someone had called his name and actually meant it. He whispered, almost to himself, I didn't vanish. Ray didn't expect anything after the courtroom. He thought it would fade like everything else, one moment of light, then back to shadow. But the story didn't end there. Daniel Price's article, Forgotten Hero, The Fall and Rise of Staff Sergeant Raymond Booker, appeared on the front page of the Richmond Sentinel. It spread quickly, reaching veterans groups, local news stations, and eventually Washington. People began to ask questions. How did this happen? How did a decorated veteran fall through the cracks so completely? Veterans Outreach offered Ray a temporary room in a community shelter. It wasn't much, but it had a bed, heat, and silence. On the first night, he stared at the ceiling, stunned by the quiet. The next morning, his public defender called, the VA's reopened your file. They're looking into the benefits denial. This article, it's moving mountains. A few days later, Ray returned to court, this time not as a defendant. The judge dismissed all charges. You should have never been here in the first place, she said. On behalf of this court, I apologize. There was no applause. Just quiet. Reverent, like a moment of prayer. That evening, Ray visited the train station. He didn't sing. just stood there, watching the crowd move past. This time, people looked back. Later, Emily knocked on his shelter door. His niece. Tears in her eyes. "Uncle Ray. I saw the news." They embraced without words. A warmth he hadn't felt in years returned. At her home, she showed him messages from strangers online. "You've become a voice," she said. "They're planning something bigger. National." A week later, the letter arrived. "You are invited to speak before a joint session of Congress on the subject of veteran homelessness and resilience." At the bottom. Dress uniform encouraged, Staff Sergeant. He stared at the box under his bed. The one with his medals. His old uniform. He opened it for the first time in years. Ran his hands over the fabric. Smoothed the wrinkles. It no longer felt like a memory. It felt like a mission. Ray stood in front of the mirror in Emily's hallway, staring at the men in uniform. The jacket still fit, snug at the shoulders, loose around the waist, but the face looking back had changed. It wasn't the face of a young soldier anymore. It was weathered, softened by loss, and marked by time. But behind the lines and gray, something steady remained: pride. He smoothed the fabric with both hands and straightened his spine. He didn't need to prove anything. Not anymore. But today, he would wear his name like a banner. Outside, a car waited to take him to the Capitol. Emily gripped his hand before he left. "She'd be proud, you know." Ray nodded. "I hope she'd say I kept my promise." The Capitol was buzzing. Cameramen, aides, journalists, all watching as Ray walked slowly into the chamber. The hall fell silent. One by one, senators and representatives stood. It wasn't ceremony. It was respect. At the podium, Ray didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. His voice carried through the chamber like a quiet drumbeat. "I spent most of my life in uniform," he began. "I fought in 3 wars. I lost friends. I buried my wife. And somehow, after all of that, I still wasn't prepared for what came next, being forgotten." He paused, holding up his dog tags, the metal glinting under the lights. "I didn't end up homeless because I made bad choices. I ended up homeless because the system that promised to catch me didn't." He looked out at the crowd, faces that had the power to change things. "There are thousands more like me. Veterans who disappear, not in combat, but in silence. And what we need isn't pity. It's policy. We need to be seen, not just when we fight, but when we fall." He ended with quiet strength. Dignity doesn't vanish just because someone's circumstances do. The chamber didn't applaud. It didn't need to. It simply stood still, breath held in reverence. Back at Emily's farmhouse in Western Virginia, spring had begun to break through the last frost. The trees rustled gently in the wind. On the porch, Ray sat with a cup of coffee and a dog at his feet. Scout, his grizzled, sleepy-eyed companion, had taken to him instantly. They shared a rhythm now: morning walks, quiet evenings, the occasional slice of leftover bacon. Inside, Emily was humming in the kitchen, baking peach cobbler from Lorraine's old recipe. The scent floated out through the screen door, wrapping Ray in memory. He pulled a photo from his wallet: Lorraine, decades ago, straw hat too big, sunlight in her smile. He looked at it, then at the land around him. "I made it, Lo," he said softly. "I found my way back." And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man surviving. He felt like a man home.